Hi everyone, I'm Stephen Downs and I'm speaking to you from the floor of the Hyatt Hotel in San Diego. I think I can do this without messing things up. So that's what it looks like outside where I'm speaking. Yes, it's foggy. It's not clear blue skies at all out there, although I imagine it'll clear up not too long from now. This is the Friday hangout for NRC01PL, the personal learning MOOC. And we're starting a wee bit late, still struggling with this computer, or more accurately with Windows 10 on this computer. I love this computer. I've been using it for a number of years. It's a Lenovo IdeaPad. Here's what it looks like. I guess you can't really see it very well. I also forgot my camera, so I'm using my computer built-in camera. It's not the greatest camera in the world, but there you have it. So that's where we're at today. This week we covered the topic of personal learning environments, and for today I'm going to do one more presentation on personal learning environments, and that will close us off for this topic. But this topic doesn't really go away, because next week we're actually going to go into a personal learning environment. We're going to go into the LPSS.me personal learning environment. I'm going to send out information on Monday so that everybody can log in, create an account. We'll look at what we've done in there, and we'll look at the experience of taking a course inside a personal learning environment, plus doing other things, right? Because the whole idea of a PLE is you don't just take your courses in there. But that's for next week. For today, what I want to do is I want to give a short presentation. Now, I still haven't worked out, and I'd love to be able to do this. I haven't worked out a way of showing both slides and the screenshot of the talking head, which is me, at once on the video. So it results in kind of dull video. I'm sort of sorry to say that. I've tried different ways, but the camera won't allow me to show multiple versions of whatever it's taking. I wish I could say, camera applications, don't be so greedy with the camera, share, but they don't share. So let me launch into this, and we'll get underway. So screen share, and I'm going to share the entire screen again as usual. We'll go into the usual drop into infinity. I really do love that effect. And what I want to talk about now is teaching people using personal learning environments. See, now when I'm gesturing and things, you just don't see any of that. It's very easy to teach people things. I mean, Donald Trump is proving that, right? A lot of teaching isn't based on reason at all. A lot of teaching is simply based on repeating the same thing over and over and over again. I mean, it's basically propaganda. The trick is to have them learn the right things, and have them learn the right things in the right way. So, okay, one of the things that I do is I have this online newsletter. There was a comment not too long ago from Linda Harasum, and she said, Stephen Downs, all he ever does is preach. And I just killed myself reading that, because I've been running this newsletter every weekday for the last 15 years. This is how I teach. And it's hilarious for someone to say, oh, all he does is preach. No, I actually work with the system and use the system as a teaching tool. And from my perspective, this is the new approach to teaching. It's working out loud. So 16,000, actually, I checked recently, it's actually 6,000 people. And, you know, I've looked at this body of work, which is a ridiculous body of work when you think about it, and look for common links, topics, conversations, publications, etc. The first word to describe it is chaos, really. But what this reflects is that we work in a complex domain, not a complicated domain, a complex domain. And let me explain the difference. Complicated means it has a lot of moving parts. That's it. But you could decompose it, and you could identify what causes what. You know, it's like one of those Rube Goldberg engines. You know, you can tell the marble actually makes the bottle of water spill over. Complex is different. It has a lot of moving parts, but they aren't organized into a nice, neat system. They're not assembled. Rather, they influence each other. Mutually dependent connectivity, basically. And so you cannot tell what the effect of one thing is going to have on the effect of another thing. The human brain is not complicated. The human brain is complex, and you never know really what one thing is going to cause another thing to do. You know, it's like they say, the butterfly thesis, right? And that so brilliantly illustrates the difference between complicated and complex. The thesis is simply a butterfly flapping its wings due to, you know, the power of small effects can affect the weather in Central Park. If it was just a complicated system, we would get that butterfly. But it isn't. It's complex, and we don't know what butterfly, and we don't even know that it is a butterfly. And it could be a grasshopper, it could be anything. Another way of illustrating complex is with the three-body problem. How do you the influence of three bodies on each other? How do you predict in advance what the orbit is going to be? The problem is each of those bodies exerts an influence on the other bodies. So in connectivism, this is the theory that George Siemens named and that we've both developed, we draw on the complex rather than the complicated. We depict learning as complex, not complicated. So we begin without a curriculum, without a theory, without a body of knowledge. That doesn't mean we don't talk about things. That would be pretty silly. Things that we talked about are the MacGuffin, the tool that we use in order to prompt the engagement and the interaction from one person to another in our network. Because we understand that we're not simply trying to push knowledge into someone's head. What we are trying to do is to get the learner to develop this complex web of interdependencies. It's not that there's nothing to learn. It's that the world is complex. The world itself is complex, and it needs to be navigated, not memorized. Talked about the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. On my view of learning, we have 3 L's, language, logic, and learning. So that leads us to the first theme of the personal learning environment. We're trying to stimulate active engagement, not passive observation. It's a bit like actor network theory, but there's no presumption of commonality, there's no presumption of translation of meaning or anything like that. Research, but there's no presumption of a community of practice. Sure, someone might, some might develop, great. Sure, as an ant, there might become, but there's no presumption here. We don't think and presume and depend on the fact that these things will exist. It's about thinking for yourself. It's about critical thinking and reflection. Each individual in this network of individuals making their own decision, finding their own way, serving their own priorities. Sometimes free learning. And free learning means 2 things, really. On the one hand, it's learning that happens for free. You don't have to pay for it. That's always been a really important theme that George and I and others have talked about. But the other part of free learning is that when you learn, you are free. When you learn, you are following your own path. The picture of learning you should have is where each individual is connected to other individuals and each individual is autonomous. So think of it this way. Learning occurs in a network. Teachers are nodes, students are nodes, we're all nodes. We're all interconnected nodes. And so both teaching and learning consist in essence of sending and receiving communications to the other nodes. What's the content of those communications? Well, it's theories and observations and knowledge and representations, etc. But that's not the important thing. If we look at a neural network, the content of the signals one neuron sends to another is, electrical signals, bit, 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 bit. Same thing. The content isn't important. It's the result of all of this interaction that's important. So the method of learning in a connected network, in a personal learning environment, is working with these signals, aggregating them in, bringing them into yourself, remixing them, repurposing them, and basically creating something of your own from the input and then sending it forward. And I've named this in honor of CogDog blog, Alan Levine, the ARF model. Think of learning as a river, not a reservoir. Knowledge isn't something you stack up in your brain, one thing on top of the other. It's rather much more like developing the capacity to navigate, to surf, to sense, to experience. We're not gaining facts, we're creating a person. And this is where the idea of the personal learning environment comes in. Yesterday, I gave you Scott Wilson's PLE diagram. Here it is again. And now look at it from the perspective of we're bringing things in from elsewhere in the world. In the future VLE, we're working with them for ourselves, and then we're sending them out again into the world. Scott Wilson developed a simple personal learning environment he called Plex. I'm not sure what the X stood for. I think it was just an X, like an MITx or TEDx or whatever. And it's not bad, but it's more like a search engine, isn't it? It doesn't really look like a place where you would do things. It looks like a place where you would find stuff and then play a video, like learn to play the acoustic guitar, etc. But he's following the right path here. In work that I've done, I did a thing called My Glue. Take that, Linda Harasson, who thinks that I never do anything. And what My Glue did is it pulled together a bunch of RSS feeds, joined them together, filtered them based on a set of topics, and created a new RSS feed as output. A very simple mechanism for managing input and output information. I also built something called an RSS writer, and this is a bit closer to the model of the personal learning environment that I was working toward, where the list of content would be on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we would have a window where we created content, and of course, we would forward that content, send it forward to other people. That's where the feed forward comes in. This here is a feed forward system. It's called feed forward. But again, the idea is that we can take information. So you see we have the search in the upper left. We can do some writing in the lower left there. And then we can feed it forward to Sword or Delicious or a weblog or whatever. This was created by Thesis. So, this is Scott Wilson again and Wilbert Cran and others. Second theme is learning versus the right learning. And this is Dave Snowden's Sinfin or Sinifin or whatever. I wish he had written it in English, not Welsh. I can understand that he wants to support Welsh, but really. So we're drawing the distinction between complex and complicated, but also, chaotic and simple. And it's interesting, we focus so much on best practice, which is really a very simple version of the world. Complicated takes us to good practice, but really what we're after is emergent practice. Practice we did not even know about until we encountered the environment that we're working with. See, we have to understand interdependence in a complex environment. We have to understand that there are not going to be simple principles. This is why learning design is so flawed. There are not going to be simple causes and effects. We have to react, go with the flow. As Douglas Rushkoff used to talk about, we have to learn how to surf. So we have ourselves and our network of friends, and what we're doing with our network of friends is we're engaging in this immersive conversation with them. We're aggregating, remixing, repurposing, feeding forward. So here's a look at one way of depicting that network of friends. And this is a model we see a lot, but really it's a tree structure, isn't it? Or sometimes we call these cluster diagrams. This is actually a very traditional social network. This is the sort of social network we might see even on the internet as it exists today. There are a few very powerful sites: Google, Facebook, Twitter, Huffington Post, whatever. And they attract a lot of readers and they're connected to a lot of people. And this kind of network is very centralized. Influence is based at these central points. And we see what's called a power law of influence. And that's what we see in the lower right-hand side here, where a small number of the entities have a lot of links connecting them. What we want to build is a mesh network. We want the power to be distributed. We want it to be based on discussion and interaction rather than broadcast. We want balance to promote reflection and democracy rather than hierarchy. And we accomplish this, and this is what the little diagram in the lower left says, we accomplish this by creating diversity, by focusing on multiple edges and multiple sources of influence rather than a single source of influence. Daniel Lanier, a mathematician friend of mine, and I ran the numbers a number of years ago and showed that we can defeat the power law by increasing the diversity of interconnectivity in a network structure. So the idea here is that we're creating kind of this balance between individualism and mutuality. I sometimes talk about cooperation instead of collaboration. And the idea that we're capturing here is that even if we are on our own, even if we are, if you will, free agents, making our own decisions, etc., we exist in this complex network. We influence others, and others are influenced by us. The Ayn Rand atomism picture of the world is a world where your actions don't impact anyone else, and you can just ignore that impact. That's, baby logic. The real world that we live in is based on this set of interdependent variables where the results of any single action can ripple far beyond the individual in a chaotic, complex way. We ourselves are the story. We ourselves are the actors in this network. we do things, we create things, we pursue more than just learning, more than just our careers. We dance, we play fireworks, we make art, we make up art, we interact with each other, we talk about important things, we trade cat pictures with each other. This in totality is what makes up the internet. This in totality is what makes up our learning. We're not building on competition here. We're not working against each other in a mutually interdependent network. Indeed, a very typical result of competing with somebody else in that kind of network is it comes back on ourselves and we both lose. What we're working at is cooperation. What we're working at is shareable, a network of community-based resources, community-based interactions. I did a study for OECD a number of years ago examining how we could build a a sustainable model of open educational resources, learning resources. And the only sustainable model, really, I found, is a model in which the self creates and shares these resources. And this is, again, learning in this new environment, creating and sharing our own learning resources. Why would we do that? Well, this is the second butterfly thesis, and it's this. We do it because it's beautiful. You think about it. People put butterflies on the outside of their houses. You see this all over the place in Canada, especially Eastern Canada, but I've seen the equivalent around the world. People put flowers on their veranda. Even here in San Diego, I was wandering around near the cliffs, and there's somebody with a house with this beautiful sort of, I can't even describe it, image etched into the side of their house. Why do people do that? Nobody pays them to do it. It doesn't marginally affect their property values, but they do it because it's beautiful. They do it because they want to share. And this is the model that propels open online learning in general. This is connectivism. This is what George named and what we've been working on. At its heart, I wrote, connectivism is the thesis that knowledge is distributed across a network of connections, and therefore that learning consists of the ability to construct and traverse these networks. This is what underlines the course components that we've used in our MOOCs and that you would use in a personal learning environment. Things like a wiki to provide a whole host of resources, but also a wiki where you can add and share and create your own resources. Things like forums, online discussions, like the Moodle forum, like the forum in this current MOOC, which is basically the simple edX forum. Leading to our third theme, groups versus networks. Now, this wasn't probably the best thing or the best named theme I could have come up with. In reflection, I probably should have used terms that people don't have such deep meanings associated with. I probably should have said something like collectives versus connectives, or something like that. But the idea is that we have, on the one hand, this old model based on unity and coordination, closed systems where knowledge flows from the center out to the extremes, as compared with the model for personal learning environments, a model based on network principles, and with the four themes of successful networks: diversity, autonomy, openness, and interactivity, or connective models of distributing knowledge. We'll talk about that more. It's like Nancy White has written, we create open spaces online, and we have the me and we have the we, but we also have the network, which goes beyond just our local communities. It goes beyond the groups that we form online. It's based on objects that we care about, objects like the butterflies, objects like articles, videos, this presentation online. So we're sharing and connecting not just people, but people and things and resources and places and events and times, etc. We're creating a model of distributed resources. So I put this in because it's a lolcat. And it's one of the things that we share. It's one of the ways that we express ourselves in this network. And it doesn't have to be serious. It doesn't have to be deep. It doesn't have to be representative. It can be a picture of a cat with a funny quip, because that's how we create things. That's how we learn. So I've talked a bit in previous presentations about the tools and the mechanisms behind this, about the idea of repositories, online places where we can store these things. Today we call that the cloud, but these concepts have been around for years. And ways we share these resources with RSS or Atom or Dublin Core, or these days again with JSON feeds. I've talked about things like self-organization, the way we set this up and it organizes itself. We don't need to manage the structure of the network. If we set up the network as a network with those principles of autonomy and diversity, etc., such that each independent entity manages itself, it will find its own best organization. There are principles that describe this. There are principles that describe this on a single neural level, and these principles also apply at a larger social level or apply to networks in general. How do connections form? Connections form based on what we might call network learning. Here are three models of network learning. Hebbian association. Like connects with like. Birds of a feather flock together. Another model, back propagation. It's the feedback system, right? It's based on a desired outcome. It's based on comparing what you got with what you want. Of course, what you want might vary from person to person, but given what you want, you can feed back into the network a response. It's back propagation. And then Boltzmann mechanisms. Boltzmann mechanisms are based on the idea of the network settling to its most stable state from an energy perspective. It settles in like the water on a pond settles. After you throw a rock into it, there's a bunch of ripples, but eventually it will settle in and all the interconnected atoms in the water will reorganize. The mechanisms, I talked about Grasshopper and the use of Grasshopper in the courses that we've taught. Grasshopper is intended to provide exactly, or to create exactly this sort of network. It creates mechanisms to input content, to process content, and to distribute content. It's what we use for page creation. We create a page, and we create the page from this database of things that we're working with, that we've input, that we've changed, and we now want to feed forward. We harvest the content from RSS in Grasshopper, or today we also harvest from Twitter, from Facebook, from JSON, etc. We organize it all together. We map it to different kinds of data types, and then we export it in things like the daily, which is the same as the daily newsletter that you receive in this course. There's feed harvesting, there's the complex interconnectivity of the course, and then the internet of 2007, this goes, which is almost the internet of today. Social networks, blogs and blogging, wikis, tagging, etc., except now it's all moving to the cloud. The internet of 2009 is a complex, interconnected kind of thing. It is 2016 as I speak. The players have changed, but the model is continuing to develop. We create course components, we use widgets and gadgets, we don't use Google Wave anymore, but we use things like Facebook and Twitter, etc., to accomplish the same sort of thing. There was a product called Opera Unite, which was a great idea at the time. It didn't take off because things like Facebook and Twitter did it instead. But the idea of Opera Unite is that individuals would use their web browser not just as a web browser, but also as their own personal web server. It was too complicated to manage to run off a desktop, but today everybody has their own web server. They don't necessarily realize that. But again, if you use one of these cloud applications or social network applications, you have your own web server. You probably have several web servers. And that creates the live mesh. That creates the network of connected objects from to another entity, your image to the other person who created the video, etc. So we're looking at creating an environment in a personal learning environment where you have not just a way of browsing entities, but also you have, if you will, your own web server to share these entities themselves. That creates this complex network of interaction, and again, we come back to that original model: aggregate, remix, repurpose, feed forward. But now, it looks much more like an ecology than it looks like a hierarchy. And this is your personal learning center. Your personal learning center grants you autonomy. Your personal learning center grants you diversity. You access multiple views. You interface with multiple technologies. Your personal learning center is connected and interactive, not integrated with some other application, but one of many small pieces loosely joined. And indeed, your personal learning environment itself is composed of small pieces loosely joined. And your personal learning center is open to multiple information providers, open to multiple kinds of learning, open to other companies, other institutions. It's modeled after the internet itself. So that's the model, that's the thinking behind the personal learning environment. And that's the thinking behind what we're trying to create even in the LPSS program. It's got a lot of moving parts. It's a complicated system to build. It's a complex system to build. But the idea here is to, by getting the pieces right, the overall organization of the system will organize itself, and the individuals working within that system will be able to benefit from the complexity that they've created in their own learning environment by creating networks of resources and objects, etc., in their own personal learning environment. And also they can participate in the much wider network of everybody interconnected together, and thus participate in the creation of new and emergent knowledge on a society-wide basis. So that's the model. Still have viewers, so thank you for being viewers. And I'm going to close it off here because we've probably gone on long enough for a Friday broadcast. We'll be back on Monday. We'll have another webcast on Tuesday, and we'll continue next week by looking at the inside of one of these personal learning environments that we've been creating here at National Research Council. So thank you for your time. So long from San Diego.